This is Freethought Forum, a program produced and funded by the Atheist Society of Knoxville and by the Rationalists of East Tennessee. I'm Ralph Eisler.
And I'm Larry Rhodes, and we want you to know that if you don't believe in God, you're not alone. Right here in East Tennessee, you can find free-thinking atheists and agnostics. This is a show for them and for people committed to a life rooted in science and free of supernatural beliefs.
This is a call-in show. However, we only have one phone line. So if you can't get through, we invite you to tweet us at FFTPKnox. While we go over a few announcements, we invite you to start calling in now at the number on the screen. Get a pen and paper, and we'll give you our email address later in the show.
The Atheist Society of Knoxville frequently has a fun meetup at a bar or eatery. Tonight's meetup, as usual, is at Barley's in the Old City, starting at around 5:30. Look for the silver-jacketed copy of The God Delusion standing upright on the table. Sorry, you're behind me. As Matt Dillahunty at the Atheist Experience always says, everyone is welcome to our meetups for happy hour or food, drink, and conversation. But if you plan to preach, proselytize, provoke, or punch, please don't.
The Rationalists of East Tennessee have several regular monthly meetings. First and third Sunday mornings are usually lectures with lively roundtable discussion. The book club meets on the second Sunday, and the Reflections group gets together for a potluck lunch on the fourth Sunday. Visit our websites for additional details, including times and locations.
The word truth gets flung around quite a bit these days, and a lot of people claim to know the truth. We've had callers phone in and claim every word in the Bible is true. What does that mean? A word by itself can't either be true or false. You have to have at least two words to form an idea, and that could be labeled as true or false. And there are clearly many ideas that are purported to be true that are obviously not. So our show today is focused on how do we define truth, and how do we tell if something is true. But before we discuss these points, we'll take a look at some of the items in the news today.
Okay, well, the first item in the news is that the Freedom from Religion Foundation has been in a legal battle to end the parish exemption for years. The parish exemption allows ministers to deduct the cost of rent for their church-owned houses from their taxable income. FFRF believes this shows preferential treatment for religious leaders. And FRF's, that is the Freedom from Foundation, Freedom from Religion Foundation's own board has even paid its co-presidents, Dan Barker and Annie Laurie Gaylor, $15,000 each as part of their housing allowance. But because they don't qualify as ministers of the gospel, the law doesn't apply to them. That's one of the ways they've tried to prove that the law is illegal.
A few months ago, the U.S. Department of Justice ridiculously argued that the exemption was legal and that FFRF's leaders were eligible for the tax break because atheism, they said, was a religion.
Why would the Department of Justice argue that race
because they want to keep it. They want to keep it going, and the people in the Department of Justice, like the majority of most of the people in the world or in America, are religious people. They want to preserve that for their friends, neighbors, and societal mates who are using that.
It seems to me an abuse, actually, of their position.
I would think. But still, it's fairly obvious that calling atheism a religion is not truth.
Yeah.
Yesterday, in a very surprising and legally sound decision, a U.S. District Judge, Barbara B. Crabb, ruled in favor of the FFRF, writing that the parish exemption was indeed unconstitutional. Crabb even laughed off the idea that Barker and Gaylor should be considered ministers. Although the religious defendants, she says, in the suit devoted a substantial amount of their briefs to this argument, it is difficult to take it seriously. Under no remote plausible interpretation of the law should plaintiffs Gaylor and Barker qualify as ministers of the gospel. And I couldn't agree more.
I couldn't agree more either. The judge said that the defendants cite no persuasive evidence that either Gaylor or Barker is ordained, that they perform sacerdotal functions or conduct worship services, that anyone in the foundation considers Gaylor or Barker to be spiritual leaders, or that the foundation is under the authority of a church. I find it strange that the defendants used this argument, where we have recently seen the religious right fighting tooth and nail to prohibit atheist chaplains in the military on the grounds that they don't really perform religious functions.
So they want their cake and eat it too, if they want it both ways.
Yeah, exactly.
It's called religious privilege, not religious rights.
Yeah.
Okay, there seems to be more than a little consistency, excuse me, there seems to be more than a little inconsistency in the religious arguments. I'm sure this ruling by Judge Crabb will be appealed, but this isn't the first time that she's ruled in favor of separation of church and state, as she should. In 2010, she declared the National Day of Prayer unconstitutional. She says it goes beyond mere acknowledgement of religion because its sole purpose is to encourage all citizens to engage in prayer, an inherently religious exercise that serves no secular function in this context. In this instance, the government has taken sides on a matter that must be left to individual conscience. When the government associates one set of religious beliefs with the state and identifies non-adherents as outsiders, it encroaches upon the individual's decision about whether or not, or even how, to worship.
Yeah, I mean, this question comes up all the time when this National Day of Prayer comes around. It hasn't been questioned for quite a long time, and I see now in the last few years it's getting a lot more pushback from the secular community.
Yeah.
So anyhow, well, speaking about separation of church and state, a leading scholar on this subject gave a presentation November 7th on the 20th anniversary of the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, in which he said religious liberty is becoming a casualty of America's cultural wars. Douglas Laycock of the University of Virginia's Law School noted that debates over sexual issues like abortion, same-sex marriage, contraception, sterilization, and emergency contraception is turning much of the country against religious liberty.
Especially the young people.
Yeah, especially. And these debates all share one thing in common, he says. What one side views as a grave evil, the other side views as a fundamental human right. For tens of millions of Americans, conservative churches have made themselves the enemy of liberty. And for tens of millions of Americans, what religious liberty is an excuse to empower their enemies. And that, in their view, is a bad thing. And I think he's right. Now, I maintain, a little off the subject, that one of the reasons why the Republicans lost so badly in the last election was that they concentrated so much on sex and reproduction, even writing it into their platform, you know.
Yeah.
And we had a couple of people who would probably have been elected to the Senate who made some stupid comments, you know, about rape and reproductive rights, and they didn't get anywhere.
Yeah.
So I certainly hope that that's going to start turning a lot of people off.
Yeah. Well, one thing in particular, one plank of the Republican Party that particularly pissed me, or disappointed me, was that they put in there that they should no longer teach critical thinking in the school.
Yeah.
And to me, that's, I mean, critical thought is the foundation of all progress in the country, whether it's secular or religious. You've got to have critical thinking, and they want to outlaw that. They say you shouldn't be able to teach it to children.
Yeah, I think that was in Texas, right?
Yeah, well, where else?
Yeah, where else?
Which is the base for the Republican Party anyway. Well, Laycock said many Americans experience a growing intuitive reaction against such discussions. They are tired of having the Catholic bishops and the evangelical preachers or hearing them, they are tired of hearing the Catholic bishops and evangelical preachers, and they view them as trying to restrict other people's sex lives while not having any restrictions on their own, apparently.
Yeah.
He said, if that trend is in public opinion continues, he said, the Religious Freedom Restoration Act will be of no help. If people no longer believe in religious liberty, America will lose it. He emphasizes how much more narrowly the concept is defined in France, where the church was on the wrong side of history during the Revolution. A similar cultural revolution in America could restrict religious freedom if the churches remain obsessed with sex and reproductive rights.
Yeah.
Now
Okay.
to our program.
So we're going to get on to the main part of our program here. We're going to try to discuss what is truth. And a lot of you out there probably have some ideas. Please call in. This is a call-in show. Numbers up there on the screen. So let me start with this. Robert Perry is a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist, and he's written the following. The real struggle confronting the United States is not between right and left in any traditional sense, but between those who believe in reality and those who are entranced by unreality. It is a battle that is testing whether fact-based people have the same determination to fight for their real worldview as those who operate in a fact-free space do in defending their illusions. Among other things, this statement has led us to have this discussion about truth.
One of the appellations that have been thrown around as a disparaging name for the free thought movement by the religious right is those reality-based people.
Yes.
And I'm proud to wear the label. Thank you very much.
Well, this happened even during the Bush White House. I think it was Ron Suskind who came up there and he was talking with one of Bush's aides, and he says, well, you're one of those people who's in the fact-based area. He says, we create our own reality up here.
Yeah.
You know.
Was Oprah pushed that for a little while, didn't it?
Did she?
The idea or whatever it was that well, you can create your own reality just by wishing it to be a certain way. She created a lot of harm that way because there were people out there that were just saying, I believe I don't have cancer, and getting rid of their medicine.
Yeah.
You know, and willing their cancer to go away.
Yeah.
Of course, it didn't work.
Yeah, quacks have pushed that type of cure
for a long time. So what is truth? How do we define it? Is it absolute or is it contingent on different norms in various societies? Is truth the same as facts or reality? The late Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan stated that every person is entitled to his own opinion, but every person is not entitled to their own facts. If truth consists of facts, how do we distinguish it from opinion? If this were an easy question, we wouldn't have so many different answers from so many different philosophers. The Dictionary of Philosophy and Science lists 35 different views on the subject from as many scholars. Clearly, we live in a very polarized society as a result of differing opinions from people who have the same facts but who interpret them differently.
Yeah, recent experiment.
Okay.
We have a call.
We do have a call.
Okay.
Okay, we'll go ahead and try to take that.
Hello, caller. Welcome to Freethought Forum. Could you give us a name or a nickname?
Yes, my name is Jim.
Jim, hi. Thanks for calling in.
Well, your all's show has definitely caught my attention, and I'm not sure how many atheists live in Knoxville, Tennessee, but you know, Knoxville is certainly in the Bible Belt, and according to somebody, it's the I'm not sure whom that somebody is, but I think back in I think January, February, we were voted the I think #1 church or Bible town in America.
Most Bible conscious.
Both Bible believing.
Bible conscious, right?
City in America.
Mm-hmm. I'm always interested to hear the rest of the story. I guess to quote Paul Harvey. And I guess you have to be at least 40 to even know who Paul Harvey is, and I would imagine both of you folks are probably 40 and then some maybe.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to just first mention that I spent 13 years in the Army, spent 3 years active duty and 10 years in the Guard, and folks can believe or not believe, whatever they choose. It is America, and America is great because of our freedoms.
Mm-hmm.
Personally, I mean, obviously, to me, well, I'm not sure if it's obvious, but to me, God is is very real, and you know, bottom line is, you know, as far as I believe, if you are not born again, then you know, when you die, you're, you know, going to hell, and obviously that's what Scripture says, and again, you guys feel free to choose or not to choose to, you know, to believe what is written in Scripture, and
Okay.
and if you guys, you know, obviously you guys, well, I don't know if it's obvious, but you know, going from the, you know, from what the, you know, show was called, then it seems like you guys may have a you know, a different take on that. So you know, I just want to toss that out there, and I, you know, even though I'm a Christian, I love everybody, and I care for everybody, regardless if they believe in you know, God or not, and I hope one day to see both of you guys in heaven, and also have a great Thanksgiving, you guys.
Great.
Okay, well,
Bye-bye.
Thanks very much. I'll just make one comment on there.
I'll make one too.
Yeah, I'm sure you will. And that is that Jim kept referring to belief, and that he believes, you know, that he is going to go to heaven, and that he believes that the Bible says is true. Now, we can't argue so much with people's beliefs, okay? Because everybody has different beliefs, and as we said, everybody's entitled to them, but you're not entitled to your own facts. So I think that's where we're going to.
That's where the show's all about.
Show here.
Yeah. What I would say is, you were talking about you don't know how many atheists are in Knoxville. Well, we have at least one atheist group that's got 450 people in it, and RET has
about 100.
100 and something in it, and that's in the most Bible-believing city in America. So you can imagine where the rest of America is coming to these days. Also, you hope to see us in heaven. According to the Pope, we very may well get there as long as we live good lives. But the thing about it is, everybody's going to somebody else's hell. I mean, if Islam is true, then you're going to Islam hell. We all are, except for the Islamists. If Hinduism is true, all of us and everybody in the Abrahamic faiths are going to hell, or at least not going to their heaven. So there are, 10,000 different religions in the world. You were raised in a country that has one particular religion, you were trained to think in that particular religion, and you accept that particular religion. There are many, many people out there that don't. Matter of fact, the majority of the people in the world do not believe in your particular religion. So we have to throw that out as well.
Yeah, and okay, well, I was about ready to go on to an experience I had recently that was sort of right in line with what Jim was talking about here, and makes a good lead into the rest, I think. A few weeks ago, I wrote a letter to the Knoxville News Sentinel defending atheism from an attack by the head of a local Christian academy. A few days later, a gentleman showed up on my front doorstep, ostensibly to congratulate me on a good piece of writing. Even though he was a theist, he said it right up front. Well, in the end, he did have a specific agenda, and he left me with a Come to Jesus tract before he left. But at one point in our conversation, which I can say was very courteous, I mean, he was a nice enough fellow, businessman somewhere in Oak Ridge, he said to me that although he couldn't see the wind, he knew it existed. And in the same vein, while he couldn't see his God, it was just as real to him as the wind. It's sort of the same sentiment that Jim was expecting. But of course, this is comparing apples and oranges. We may not be able to see the wind, but we can certainly see its effects. You can see it blowing leaves around, and if it gets very hard, it can demolish houses or blow down trees if it's extremely strong. We know from a few centuries of experimentation that wind is air in motion. It consists of particles, molecules, nitrogen, oxygen, etc. And we can measure its temperature, its density, its composition, etc. These are what we call facts, the nature of the wind or of the air, because anyone with the proper instruments can measure them and get the same results. Now, the character of the air, any one place or time is an example of what I would call objective reality. It doesn't depend on the particular person who is doing it or is getting the information. Only objective reality can serve as a basis for truth. The subjective realities of individual minds can't qualify for that role. They qualify for the opinions of people bring up, but
And
not for truth.
Right, and scientists anywhere on the globe using similar instruments can get the same results from the same activity of the wind, let's say, and measuring atmospheric pressure at sea level is a constant all over the planet, and we can verify that by experimentation. On the other hand, a God has no measurable attributes. It weighs nothing, has no temperature or material composition. It's not an element of object reality. And generally, you get 20 people together in the same room, they have 20 different ideas about what God is or what his attributes are. It's subjective. You get 1,000 people, you get 1,000 people, 1,000 different perspectives on it. So if one claims that a God is real to him, it can only qualify as subjective reality, that it is different for every individual, and the perception lies only in the state of mind of that individual. Of course, the theist denies this, but they can offer no proof of such a being exists outside of his own mental processes. The existence of such a being does not constitute a fact. It constitutes a subjective perception. It's like a kid with an imaginary friend, a situation that is not too uncommon. It reminds me of Elwood P. Dowd in the movie Harvey, who has a 6'3" rabbit, tall rabbit, companioned by that name. Initially, no one other than Elwood can see Harvey, but at the end of the movie, he has talked some others into believing that they too can see him. I've sometimes wondered if this is a metaphor for how the Abrahamic religions got started, but realize it is a movie, and this is a trend that I've been seeing in movies more and more recently, and more alarming to me. It seems like every movie says has the word believe in it about 100 times, and the fact that you've got to, the whole concept of the movie comes to fruition because people do believe, and it's in every case, it's something that is magical. I mean, you've got to believe in something magical for the crux of the movie to actually happen. But it's a movie. Don't get it confused with reality.
Yeah, the same, some television shows, was there a show called Touched by an Angel or something like that?
I call it the Tinkerbell effect.
Tinkerbell effect.
If you believe it, it'll come true.
Yeah, well, maybe we can call this companion whom people seem to feel Harvey. It's a decent name, sounds a little more comfortable than God. It sounds rather imposing. Anyhow, we do seem to have an awful lot of Elwood P. Dodds who are convinced that Harvey should run the country right now, or is Sergei. So how do we distinguish facts from feelings or opinions? Well, most important, how can we get almost everyone to agree on the basic concepts and standards for truth? Well, our old friend and lifetime member of the Rationalists of East Tennessee, Massimo Pigliucci, had a couple of articles on what is truth in the two most recent editions of the Skeptical Inquirer, which is a good magazine if you haven't seen it. You ought to look at it out there. And his articles have sort of formed the background for our approach to this discussion. Massimo
notes that the traditional view on what is truth is the correspondence theory of truth, which most philosophers have assumed to be self-evident. The correspondence theory of truth basically says that truth is a correspondence between a statement X and a state of affairs that actually exists in the world described by X. It seems quite reasonable, but what do we mean by a state of affairs that actually exists? Scientists usually don't worry about that much. Truth is encapsulated in the results of research carried out by using scientific method and scientific instruments. If reproducible experiments lead to the development of a theory, which generates further testable and verifiable hypotheses, then we tend to classify it as a true description of reality, even if it seems contradictory to our naive perceptions of how the world works.
Yeah, this is one problem that we suffer from, that we are roughly 6 foot high, or what you say, in this world. In our senses, we can see a grain of sand, and maybe we can contemplate a mountain somewhere, but things outside that range are really hard for us to relate to and
conceptualize.
And oftentimes it's hard for us to consider scientific theories which seem to violate what we call common sense, which we can take in from our own senses, perceptions. And I just want to give one little example. A lot of people out there have heard of the theory of relativity, probably don't know what it is much, but I'd like to just say a few words about it and how it violates our common senses, okay? But is an element of reality, because all tests prove it true. So let's look at this. Everyday experience tells us if a baseball pitcher throws a 90-mile-an-hour fastball and we're standing next to him, that's the speed of the ball that we'll measure. But if we're in an automobile traveling 90 miles an hour down the road pretty fast, but if we pass him, as soon as he throws that ball moves right along with us, and we would say it's moving at zero velocity with respect to us. Now, Einstein's special theory of relativity is founded on the astounding postulate that if we are considering a particle of light instead of a material object, we would measure the same velocity for the light in both circumstances. Even more astounding, when one works through the mathematics of the theory, it tells us that nothing can move through space faster than the speed of light, and that energy and mass are equivalent, and the material objects become more and more massive as they approach the velocity of light. Every prediction of this theory has been verified time and time again, and it certainly fills the criteria for a correspondence theory of truth, although the results are totally counterintuitive to anything we experience in our everyday life.
I'd like to bring it back just to that one sentence, that energy and mass are equivalent. That doesn't mean they equal each other, like this way is this much and this way is this much. We're talking about equivalent. They're the same thing. If you take an object like a baseball, accelerate it to the speed of light, it would become energy, would you say?
No, it starts to approach infinite mass.
Infinite mass, that's right. I'm sorry, it would be an infinite.
But what happens is this conversion of mass to energy, this is the way the stars work. If it weren't for this, we wouldn't have a sun. The sun fuses hydrogen to make helium, and that's where most of the energy comes from, because the mass of four particles in a helium atom is slightly less than the mass of them individually.
Right, but another part of it is that as things approach the speed of light, the time for that object, or on that object, if a baseball was traveling at the speed of light, the time on the object would slow down relative to the time on Earth if it was passing the Earth, say. And without that foundation of relativity, which is counterintuitive, even the GPS system that we have, that's something as functional as that and as repeatable as that, would not work, because it's based on the theory of relativity.
Yes, clocks tick differently depending upon the strength of the gravitational field. And so the GPS system works on correlating the time on clocks on Earth and the time on clocks in orbiting satellites, and you have to make that correction for the difference in the gravitational field they experience.
It would be off.
They'll wander off by about 10 kilometers a day.
A day. Right.
Yeah.
We have a phone call. Welcome to Freethought Forum. You're on the air. May we have your name or a nickname?
Hi, my name is David J. Moneybag.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you. Could you say that again, please?
Hi, how are you?
I'm fine. I'm hearing
Hi,
you now.
my name is David, and I just had a couple questions. I'm a Baptist.
Okay, I was raised Baptist.
All right, and I just want to know, what do y'all believe about, like, Genesis? Because this is my problem, and I have a lot of atheist friends and agnostic friends, and whenever I ask them about how do they believe the world started, there's always a pause and there is no answer.
Well,
I just want to know.
Okay, I'll answer. We don't know how the world started or the universe started. We have a pretty good idea how the Earth started. It accreted out of material in a pre-solar system disk, and where gravity brought the particles together to form planets and the sun. Now, do we know where the universe came from? We don't have a definitive answer for that yet.
We don't have a definitive answer, but we have pretty good ideas. I mean, there's a recent book out called A Universe from Nothing by a physicist named Lawrence Krauss. If you get a chance, I'd recommend you read it. Or he's also given the lecture on YouTube. It would be interesting. But basic idea of how the universe may have started is that there is, it's from what I will call a cosmos, where you have quantum fluctuations. And periodically, these quantum fluctuations allow universes to come into existence for a short time. Now, when I say universe, I mean almost nothing, essentially nothing in the universe. But then there's what called an inflationary expansion, which then blows it up to very large size in a very, very short time.
Might I add that Ralph has a PhD in physics. So
okay, well, whatever. But anyhow,
I majored in physics in college,
okay.
actually.
There's another interesting thing I would like to point out about this, and that is, people often say, well, you can't get something from nothing, so where did all this come from? And but if you look at the universe the way it is today, so far as we can tell, there is nothing in it, or almost nothing. And this may sound strange, but it's because if we look at what we call mass and energy, we have ordinary matter, the type of stuff we're familiar with. We have something called dark matter and something called dark energy, which causes universal expansion. I'll call that all together stuff. There's a lot of stuff. But if you add up all the mass and energy, which we know are equivalent from Einstein's equation, as I just said, the gravitational potential energy goes into that sum as a negative quantity. And basically, all that stuff adds up very nearly to zero, so far as we can tell. It's zero, within the accuracy with which we can tell. So you can get a universe from nothing, and that was the point of Krauss's book. I don't know quite what to say beyond that, because this gets connected with questions of does time exists before the Big Bang explosion happens, and things like that.
Well, let me add one more thing to that. Do you know where the universe came from?
What?
Sorry?
Can you repeat your question, please?
Do you know where the universe came from?
You see, I personally believe that, you see, I'm strong Baptist.
Yeah.
And the idea of Genesis it makes sense to me.
Okay. Well, what you've done is you've got a God who you can't explain, that you don't know where it came from. And you've got that one creating a universe that you don't know how he created it. You don't have any idea for the processes that he created it. He just spoke and it came. This is not much of an explanation if you're trying to explain something as complicated as the universe. It sounds mystical or magical at best.
All right. So the thing is, so you guys are atheists.
That's right.
Okay. I don't understand, and I'm not insulting anyone here. I'm trying to be least ignorant as possible, because I think that's one of the problems we have in society is ignorance. Mm-hmm. Is how do you not believe that there's not a God when every day you don't know whether you'll wake up or not?
I'll answer that. Well, I went through a Baptist upbringing. I did believe it for a long time. I went to college. I met atheists. I studied other religions. I studied physics and chemistry and biology and evolution and all that. That made sense to me. Then when I started looking back at my religion that I had and the other religions that espouse totally different things, but all of them magical, it started making sense that they were all just claimed to be true thousands of years ago, because people then didn't have the answers that we have nowadays. And they passed their superstitious beliefs down through their families and through the religions and through their society until we now receive them from the earliest childhood and believe them as true.
Yeah, could I jump in just a minute?
Sure.
I didn't really understand your question. Your question is, how can you not believe in a God if you don't know if you're going to wake up the next day? I don't understand the question.
It's a broad question, because I have a lot of friends that are different faiths than I am, and we always like to talk about faith and everything. And there's just been some small things that I've picked up from every faith that is true today. You know, for example, I have a Muslim neighbor of mine, and he always tells me to eat honey. And I ask him why, and he says, well, it's just in my holy book, the Quran. So, and I did some research on it, and I found out that honey is one of the most beneficial items to be eaten. It's just small things like that. I have another Jewish friend of mine.
Hold on 1 minute. You don't have to read the Quran to find that out. In fact, you went to a book that told you that honey was very nutritious, almost the perfect food. You don't need religion to tell you that.
Yeah, but don't you see that since this book was written thousands of years ago, and it turns out to be true thousands of years later, don't you think there's somewhat of a truth and a connection toward it?
I know a book that was written about 3,000 years ago that says you shouldn't eat shrimp.
Okay,
yeah,
and
just because
I know a lot of people who eat shrimp these days. It's a big industry.
Yeah. Shakespeare wrote a lot of books, so it got a lot of truth in Shakespeare. Does that mean that the three witches around the cauldron are true? You can't accept everything in the book because there happens to be a kernel of truth in there. Turned into a prank right there at the end. Anyway.
Don't know what happened there.
No. We're down to the mid-program break. In case you're just tuning in, this is Freethought Forum, a program by the Atheist Society of Knoxville and the Rationalists of East Tennessee. Freethought Forum is funded jointly by them and by individual contributions. Shows are live most every Tuesday from 5 o'clock to 6 o'clock Eastern Time on this community access TV. You can also see us streaming online outside of the Knoxville area by going to ctvknox.org.
Okay, and remember, this is a call-in show. We're live today, November 26th, and viewers can call it to the number on the screen.
The Atheist Society of Knoxville, or ASK, meets now 1 time a week. We have evening meetups for food, drink, fun, and conversation. ASK's purpose is to supply a venue for community, camaraderie, and outreach to atheists, agnostics, freethinkers, and other like-minded persons in the East Tennessee area. Sam, would you like to run the informational videos at this point?
Around the Knoxville area and are questioning your religious beliefs or simply believe in one less God than everyone else? Well, you're not alone. The Atheist Society of Knoxville is a fun and friendly group of people just like you that meets twice a week at a bar or restaurant. We meet every Tuesday night following the show at Barley's Tap Room and Pizzeria for happy hour. You'll find our group either inside or on the patio. Look for Richard Dawkins' silver-jacketed book, The God Delusion, standing upright on the table. On Fridays, we meet at Agave Azul or the Beard and Beer Market. But if you plan to preach, proselytize, provoke, or punch, please don't. We all question what we believe at one point in our lives. If this is the time for you, come join us for food, drink, conversation, and fun. Do you find stories of talking snakes laughable? Do you prefer the scientific method over supernatural beliefs? Are you concerned about religious leaders and organizations imposing their values and rules on your body, your family, and the rest of our society? Well, take comfort in the fact that you're not alone. The Rationalists of East Tennessee meets weekly for fellowship and provides a forum for people who support skeptical thinking and rational discussion of these and other issues. To find out more information or to find out about our next meeting, visit us on the web at www.rationalist.org.
Okay, well, we're back to the program here. Just wanted to say again that the Rationalists of East Tennessee has Sunday activities involving lively presentations, discussions of subjects that are topical and timeless. Once a month we get together for a book club. You need not to have read the book to attend, but of course it helps.
Both the Atheist Society of Knoxville and the Rationalists of East Tennessee provide a social outlet where that if you find you don't believe in God, you'll also find you're not alone.
Okay, so it's up to you.
Okay, we were talking about the concept of truth. Let's, okay, we have a call in.
Have another call?
So we'll take that.
Hello, caller. Thanks for calling into Freethought Forum. Can we get a name or a nickname?
Hello, Ralph, this is Phil.
Could you try that again? We're not hearing you quite.
This is, my name is Phil.
Bill?
Bill.
Phil.
We got you now.
Oh, Bill.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I just had a comment. I was sitting here thinking about truth, and as you guys talk about truth, it's a pretty deep subject, isn't it?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I was wondering if you might consider the definition of truth, a rather subjective definition of truth, as a system of metaphors that enable the believer in that truth to be comforted or to survive. And that would, in a sense, an ethic, sort of a tradition. Thus, if it's a tradition, it's sort of based on old explanations of maybe observations of the universe. And that would sort of separate truth from what we're calling facts and reality. It might not be too closely related to facts and reality.
I think that we already have a good word in tradition. Let's call it tradition. Why do you want to muddy the water by calling tradition truth when there's thousands of different traditions all over the world that people live by?
Well, I think by this definition, it could be a subjective truth where it's true only in that it helps someone live their life.
A little later in the program, I don't know if we'll get to it, but we'll discuss a concept of truth that was promoted particularly by the American psychologist William James. And it's exactly what you said, that it helps people get through their lives, etc. But as Bertrand Russell famously said, William James has confined himself to believe in Santa Claus.
Well, also consider the Indian islands or the Indonesian islands, in a couple hundred years ago, they had a truth where a witch doctor could jump around a fire and work against the devils that were inhabiting a sick person's body. That was a set of truths that worked for that particular society, but it didn't do much good for the person laying on the ground, unless, of course, it was totally psychological.
It may have been a psychological.
I mean, the truth. Excuse me a second. The truth of the germ theory of medicine is a truth, and it's something that does help people. And this is the type of truth that we need to get to.
Okay, I think that you gave an example of a primitive sort of truth or tradition that has been outdated by modern scientific
truth
views.
Experiment and results, yes.
Experiment and results. Mm-hmm. However, experiment and results have not supplanted some traditions that are still thriving today.
Well, I think I started off this program, or early in the program, I told you about this experience I had with a fellow coming to the door who said that this God that he felt was just as real to him as the wind, okay? And I made that distinction between objective truth and subjective truths in the sense.
Okay.
And but it's only, I would maintain that it's only objective truth, objective reality that we can really call truth.
Yeah,
not that subjective
and
reality.
let's get away from primitive truth. Let's move it right on up to the 20th century, 21st century now, where you have people like Christian Scientists who send people to your house to pray for your child instead of giving them real medicine.
Right.
I mean, that's real results in the modern day.
Yeah, those are other examples of cases where the people's truth don't really, they actually do harm to people. However, I would maintain that if the gentleman said that God was just as real to him as the wind, it may be that his God provides him some benefit.
Psychologically.
I personally don't believe in a God. However, I can understand how that if a person did believe, if God was real to them like the wind was to me, I might understand how that could provide some benefit as long as he didn't use it to do harm to others.
But Phil, we're not talking about providing benefit. We're talking about how do you really define truth? And I don't think truth is can be defined as whatever benefits a person.
You don't think that could be considered a traditional ethic or system of beliefs? You don't think a system of beliefs like that could be considered a quote-unquote subjective truth?
Well,
objective truth.
I think we're talking past each other. When we're talking about objective truths, and you're talking about subjective truths.
Yeah, I think that's probably right. And I myself, a scientist, believe in objective truth, and I believe in facts. I agree, you cannot choose your own facts, and facts can be reproducible and reproduced by anybody in the world who has the proper experimental equipment to do that. But I'm just talking about other things that people call truth that may not fit into that definition, that sort of a definition of facts and reality that you're talking about.
But we've tried to make this distinction. I mean, I'll say it again, that I think that you have objective realities and individuals can have subjective realities, and that only objective realities can be considered truth in the sense that all mankind can consider them truth.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I agree with that statement. And my wife is saying that she does not agree with me. She's sitting beside me here, so I think it's time for me to hang up and let somebody else have the line.
Well, thanks for your call.
Yeah.
All right.
Thanks for calling.
Good to hear from you.
Okay, so we had talked before we got into the mid-break and some calls and things about theory of relativity as an objective truth, and so
we're going to contrast this concept of truth with the concepts religion proposes as truth. There's seldom correspondence between religious tenets of truth and the actual state of affairs in the world. Consider the hypothesis: God answers prayers. If this were a universal truth, the world would be a very different place. I'll hazard a guess at the end of the political conflicts in the Middle East is the state of affairs that has received the single most attention by prayers in the last 50 years. It hasn't helped, it hasn't happened.
No. An extensive test of the efficacy of intercessory prayers for very sick patients using the best protocols with control groups actually showed a slight anti-correlation. There were three groups. There were a number of people. They were divided into three groups. One group received prayers and were told they received prayers. The other group received prayers but were not told, and the third group didn't receive any prayers. The third group had a slight but not statistically significant better record of improvement than the others. So from that point of view, from the correspondence theory of truth, the statement that God answers prayers has to be declared a falsehood. Or as the motto on Faithless Force t-shirt declares, Faithless often appears on this program, nothing fails like prayer.
Right. Of course, the theist always has his excuses, such as God would not submit himself to scientific testing, or that God answers some prayers but not all, or he says that God says no on some of the prayers.
Sure.
We cannot know the mind of God, the believer says. None of these statements qualifies as truth. They are only conjectures.
So, although the correspondence theory of truth suffers somewhat from epistemological problems of how do we know what we think we know, it does seem to provide the most valuable tool for determining truth so far as actual situations in the world goes. Nevertheless, okay, I think we've got another caller here, Larry.
Right. Okay, welcome to Freethought Forum. You're on the air. May we have a name or a nickname?
Call me Coney.
You'll have to speak up a little bit.
Hello?
Can you give us your name again?
Call me Coney.
Pam?
Coney. Coney's my nickname.
Tony. Okay. Welcome to the show, Tony. Do you have a comment or question for us?
I had a question.
Sure.
So I don't really fully understand the whole concept of evolution. Like, you're telling me some ape just turned into an Asian?
No, we're not telling you that. Where did you hear that?
Like, because I was talking with my neighbor the other day, and he's atheist, and he was telling me that the apes just start turning into Asians and black people and white people. It just doesn't make sense.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't make any sense.
There's plenty of good resources on the internet if you want to go actually look it up and ask your questions so people are qualified to answer. But the people that you're talking to apparently don't know anything about it. So I would do some research on evolution.
But I have another question, sir.
Okay.
So what about, I mean, you guys say you don't believe God, so you just, like, the universe came out of nowhere or something?
No, we don't believe that either. Were you watching earlier in the show when we talked about that?
No, just flipped on my TV and saw this.
No.
Yeah, well, we had talked a little bit about that earlier, and this is a pretty complicated subject, and we don't particularly want to repeat it again, but current feeling is that the universe probably came out of what's called a quantum fluctuation in a vacuum. And that's a pretty difficult concept to try to explain here in just a couple of minutes, so I think we're not going to go into that. But I'll again recommend to you that if you have a chance, that you read this book by Lawrence Krauss called The Universe from Nothing.
When do you turn 8?
I think we're going to move along.
I think we have to move along here.
Okay, where were we?
Well,
you were at nevertheless, I think.
Correspondence theory of truth is a pretty valuable tool. Nevertheless, over the past several decades, people have rival concepts, and one of these is a coherent theory of truth. This replaces the idea of correspondence with facts with the idea of coherence among propositions. This approach we're accustomed to taking with logic and mathematics, developing a set of conclusions from a few propositions through deductive reasoning. However, as an alternative to the correspondence theory, it doesn't seem to work very well in science when used alone. You can reach no conclusions concerning the true state of the universe that are not already inherent in propositions you make in any logical system. You have to can construct many theories about nature that are coherent, but lead to entirely different conclusions about the way the world is. You have to touch base with reality somewhere along the way.
As a case in point, let's consider some of the traits that Christians characteristically assign to their God. The God is supposed to be incorporeal, that is, not made of the stuff that comprises the objects of everything else that we detect in our universe. Second, it is not constrained. God is not constrained by time or space. And third, it is supposed to be omnipotent, all-powerful. This attribute has sometimes led people to pose questions such as, can God create a stone that is too heavy for him to lift? From a purely deductive view, this is a logical contradiction and cannot be admitted into a discussion of omnipotence. However, these are properties that are often justified by ontological arguments, saying that they're true. Ontological arguments are proofs for the existence of a God based on logic alone.
Yeah. So let's consider an example of what a being with these properties of omnipotence and incorporeality could do if it existed. It would be logically possible for it. Do we have another caller?
Yeah. Welcome to Freethought Forum. May we have a name or nickname?
What's up, man, Daddy?
I can't hear you, sorry.
Ted.
I'm still not getting the name. Can you say it one more time?
Hello?
Yes, I hear you.
Hey, how are you?
Doing good. May we have a name or a nickname?
This is Jonas.
Jonas, nice to meet you. It's your comment or question today.
I want to become atheist soon.
Is there like a certain vow have to do with something?
Yeah.
Okay. Been an interesting show.
Yeah. So let's consider an example of what a being with these properties of omnipotence and incorporeality could do. It would be logically possible for it to move a battleship from Pearl Harbor to the top of Mount McKinley in a trillionth of a second. But if we consider some well-established truths of science, this scenario has problems. That God may not be constrained by space or time, but the battleship is. The battleship is a real material object. Getting back to the special theory of relativity that I talked about and what we kicked around for a little bit, which certainly qualifies as factual, it says that nothing can be moved through space faster than the speed of light. So no God can make this transition occur in a trillionth of a second. Therefore, an omnipotent God cannot exist.
Mm-hmm. This conclusion is not the result of logical impossibility, but of physical impossibility. An omnipotent God, unrestrained by space and time, can maybe fit into a coherent theory of truth, but it cannot be accompanied by a corresponding theory of truth because correspondence theory of truth because it simply doesn't conform to the way the world actually is. Moreover, any object approaching the speed of light will also approach infinite mass, as we were talking about a minute ago, from our perspective. So physics tells us that if the God could get anywhere near moving a battleship at the speed of light, it would be creating an object that would be too heavy to lift.
Okay. Strange, isn't it? How
Very.
Reality intrudes on the coherence theories that people try to put together. Okay, well, this is also not to mention the fact that it requires a force to accelerate the battleship. Do we have another caller?
We do, theoretically. We're going to try to take it.
Hello, caller. Thanks for calling into Freethought Forum. Could we have a name or a nickname?
Hi.
Hello, we hear you. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Steven.
Okay.
Yeah, Steven.
And sometimes when I'm using the bathroom, I get really scared.
We're going to have to work on the calls here.
We're going to have to get some screening.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so it's not only the fact it would become infinitely heavy, it's not to mention the force required to accelerate a battleship to high speeds. There is no mechanism by which an object that has no substance can exert a force on anything. Of course, the theist will say God can suspend the laws of nature. However, he can provide no examples of this possibility ever having happened. He has to invoke the God the magician argument. God the magician argument is not an argument that is factual. God the magician creates the universe out of nothing. Okay? That's not a factual statement.
No.
Okay? As an anthropologist Bronislaw Malinowski observed in his famous essay on magic, science, and religion, science is founded on the conviction that experience, effort, and reason are valid, magic on the belief that hope cannot fail, nor desire deceive. In any case, coherence alone is not a good test for physical reality.
Right.
So we're coming now to the end of the show. We only have about a minute left.
One point. If it takes only the faith of a mustard seed to move a mountain, there has never been a believer with the faith of a mustard seed because there's never been a mountain moved.
Okay. Well, it's time to stop wrapping up. Get out your pen and paper.
This has been Freethought Forum, a program by the Atheist Society of Knoxville and the Rationalists of East Tennessee.
Please send us feedback. You can leave voicemail at 865-272-9060 or email us at freethoughtforum@yahoo.com.
And you can see this show most Tuesdays from 5 o'clock to 6 o'clock.
Okay, and our thanks to Sam and Jonas for technical help and for Faithless Forest for being the studio audience. And our thanks to the staff at CTV Knox and to all our callers who called in today. We had some very good calls. We're sorry for the ones that got a little out of line there. It's not easy to screen them all out.